As Beverly Sheffield descended the stairs for his regular swim, he reflected on his long history with his beloved Barton Springs.
And we hope as time goes on that we can do a little bit more.
As director of the Austin Parks and Recreation Department for over 30 years, Sheffield helped shape Austin's identity as a city that values open space and recreation. When many of his peers were slowing down, Sheffield continued his nearly daily swims at the springs, contemplating how he could preserve the many stories of the Austin he had known. In 1988, Sheffield crisscrossed the city, recording the memories of many of Austin's old guard. One of Bev's contemporaries, and his best-known interviewee, was John Henry Faulk.
Go down, angel, and close the door. Times have been, shan't be no more.
Faulk was a protege of folklorist J. Frank Dobie, and a prominent writer, radio personality, and raconteur in his own right. The conversation between Bev and John Henry frames our story of Barton Springs from 1912 to 1962.
This is Beverly Sheffield. At this time, I'm out at the home of John Henry Faulk. John Henry, I want to talk to you a little bit about Barton Springs.
Well, I'd be very happy to, because it was a very important factor in my life. It was a very important factor in Austin life, and that's what makes it such a remarkable natural phenomenon. We lived out on Live Oak Street, West Live Oak, which was out of the city limits, you know. It was the last street south in Austin then, but it wasn't in Austin, Texas, so we lived in the country. We'd walk down South First Street, then branch off through the big cattle pens down there and go travel on out to Barton Springs Road, which was unpopulated. You'd get to Barton Creek, you'd cross this rickety bridge, and you went through Zilker's pasture. And the road swung off to the left, and that went down to Barton Springs. It was a great natural swimming hole. And I remember some girls forded the river on their horses, and they were real rich girls from over in town. I think one of them was a Reed girl. But they tied those horses, and they went up and brought their bathing suits, and they swam at Barton Springs. I remember I was profoundly impressed.
When I was a child, that's where the city of Austin used to get its water. And when the river would turn over and it tasted so very badly, everybody in Austin would bring a 5-gallon jug or larger and would come down and stand in line there at Barton Springs to get their drinking water for the week. And really, there was very little park there. There was just Barton Springs, and where you see Zilker Park and all the development today was out in the cornfields.
I remember when my brother and 2 older sisters would go fishing at the springs, and us kids would play in the water and gather up pecans.
My father knew A.J. Zilker. Daddy would ask him if we could go out to the springs and have a picnic. And Mr. Zilker would say, why, yes. He had a surrey with the fringe on top. we'd ride out there and spend the day.
Now, as I recall it, Zilker wanted Barton Springs to belong to the public.
Well, when did Zilker give the swimming pool itself then?
1917.
Barton Springs is a sacred spot. It would be a wrongful thing for this beauty spot to be owned by any individual. It ought to belong to all the people of Austin.
We're entering the jazz age. The time I'm talking about is the early 20s. And I remember they put this pavilion, and I remember that it was a big affair because that modernized Barton Springs. They'd put rocks across it to kind of hold the water up. It formed something of a dam.
People would call me. They'd call to find out if I was out there or not. And they would send their children out there if I was there. So I helped to raise an enormous amount of children in Austin.
And I think they started charging admission to get in, a dime. But if you camped out there, you could go in free. Hell, they couldn't stop you. Just go out and jump in the water, see?
We just lived out there. As soon as we could possibly get out of school, we would go down to Barton Springs, and many of the boys rode bicycles, and most of the people just walked.
The pool was this natural wonder, and we all adored it. You'd see the perch and the trout down in there, the bass down in the water. It was a long holiday to me, and Barton Springs became I don't know how to say it, Bev. It became part of my personality, Barton Springs was.
I go to Barton's every afternoon and have a delightful cooling off. What a poem that place is. Do you not sometimes dream of its great towering pecan trees over sparkling waters? The Apaches knew a good thing.
Zilker Park was my front yard. We lived in the rock house that's right by the playscape. Basically, my father was over Zilker Park as a caretaker. I guarantee you there wasn't a rock, there wasn't a branch, there wasn't anything we didn't turn over and look at in Zilker Park. My father started out in there in 1928. The land on the south side of the pool was more or less of a bluff area. And then in 1928, when they had a bond program to build the sidewalks and the lower dam and the upper dam, I think the dam was finished in 1930, the Atlanta Dam Tour.
The springs were a good place for an outing. And I remember when the city started fixing it up and spending money, it grew pretty bad to where they didn't want the coloreds to have a picnic out there. They even stopped letting people gather up pecans.
Now, as they expanded the Barton Pool facility, it moved, of course, into a greater and greater importance in Austin life. And greater numbers went out there. The summers were dedicated pretty much to Barton Springs.
When I came to UT in the summer, they ran a bus from University and downtown out to Barton Springs, and they dropped you off in front of the bathhouse. I worked real hard to get the best suntan in town. I mean, I worked at it, wearing a little old bathing suit so I could get some more suntan.
The real gods were the lifeguards. And at first they only sat on the grass and talked to everybody. But gradually they were lifted onto the stand so they could save more people, because more people needed saving. Around them clustered a little wreath of pretty little girls, and to see them with their heads lifted and the fine-looking Apollo sitting in his chair was a pleasure on every count.
Well, there were fixtures out there, all of whom I knew. I mean, they were just forever out there.
All parts of Barton had territorial imperative. The students stayed more or less across the water. The erudite ones stayed directly across where the springboard was. Each of these powerful personalities who chose a territorial position and who went every day, more or less at the same time, and who thus attracted a group around them, became like stars in the movies.
Use the word swimmers lightly. They were rock setters. They were habitués of the place.
I was a young guest in the circle, frequently enough for me to be grateful. I simply was aware that there was 3 old guys, one of whom was Roy Belichick, the naturalist who had run the Texas Interscholastic League for all the high schools and colleges and universities in Texas. Dobie was writing prolifically, pouring out books about cowboys and vaqueros and all of that. Webb wrote great books. The Great Plains was a great work of history. They were just a kind of a trio who were willing to be themselves. And that's what attracted me to them, because I was trying to do the same thing as a young man.
That's during the 50s when it reached its true zenith as their gathering place.
Barton Springs was a special place because it's fresh water, it's in a beautiful setting, the park itself was superior. We knew about it, but we knew that we could not go into that water, period.
Historically, black people were there, and they used to swim there. They might have even washed their clothes there for all we know. But then the Jim Crow era brought in rules that this is for whites only. We used to be totally segregated. We called ourselves Negro at the time. We all lived east of what is I-35 now, but what used to be called East Avenue. And the Mexican Americans, as we called them at the time, all lived from about 7th Street down past the river.
There wasn't nearly as many Mexicans in Austin as there are now. And of course, they were segregated. They were treated as a separate breed of human.
We couldn't go to the movie houses. We couldn't go to the parks, to the pools. But there was no park in Austin that we could go to other than Rosewood Park. There was no pool we could swim in other than Rosewood Park Pool. I think people would make the argument, well, you have your own, you have your own. Well, I'm sorry, but Barton Springs was there from nature and from God, however you view that.
Well, the signs would say colored in white for drinking water in public. That's the way it was.
A lot of people were against integration. Nothing changed unless you fought for it in those days. We wanted Barton Springs Pool open for all of Boston.
I think the most useful citizen is the one who questions the culture and violates it when necessary. Azie was secretary to a very dear friend of mine. She was a very black and beautiful woman. And I don't remember whether Azie said it to me or I said it to her. Why don't we go into Great Barton Springs? We decided to do it. So I told my wife, Jean, about it. She wanted to join us. Our son, who was old enough, overheard us, and he wanted to go.
Ronnie Duggar had brought a black woman out to Barton Springs in the afternoon. And I remember he was going to integrate it, and I was out there.
Azie Morton had a beautiful white bathing suit on, looked like a model, and she just did a fantastic dive right next to one of the high society ladies of West Austin. She said, "There goes the neighborhood."
This had created quite a stir out there among the old-timers. Some people saw the end of the world coming. Some people thought it was great.
There was a white woman, and she just joined us. She saw Azie was there, and she silently joined us and stayed with us the whole time.
I was always a liberal, but it a little offended me, the thought of turning it over and letting the blacks come out there. I realized that I was a racist too.
We had to change. I mean, there was no question about it. We had been a segregated community, and we had been very forceful about not allowing people to do this and that and so forth because of color.
Do you remember when Barton Springs was integrated? When it became permissible for blacks to go there?
I can't tell you the exact date. I can tell you a history of how we began to integrate through the recreational programs here in Austin.
Were you in the recreation department then?
Oh, my goodness. I was in the recreation department for 40 years. There came a time when we decided to take the signs off the restrooms. Take it off.
And that's all we wanted. If we want to go there, we can go. Opening Barton Springs, Zilka Park, I believe, really started a lot of other things in other areas of the city.
This began the activist stage of civil rights in Austin.
Barton Springs was the heart of all of that because it mattered the most.
Water has always been important to Austin. Water is something that seems to calm people and seems to pull people together. And so I think that's what makes Austin the community it is.
We take our family, when all the kids and grandkids come together, we go out there and make a day of it. And we love it.
It's the greatest public swimming pool known to me in the United States. It's just the best thing in Austin.
Barton Springs is important to Austin because it provides an anchor for the community.
The social life here, you meet the most wonderful people here.
It seems like it brings everybody together, different culture.
Unites all parts of the city. Everybody has their own unique connection with the pool.
It's important for Austin to keep connected to the history of what's been here.
Kind of a feeling of community, and you almost always run into someone you know, and it's
we just did.
Yeah, we did.
We all love it and we revere it. It's sacred to us all.
I think I really liked this conversation.
Well, I think we better say how much we've enjoyed our little chat.
Sure. You're a wonderful guy. Hell, I've enjoyed this more than you have. I hope I put something on there that's worthwhile.
Sure you have. You bet. It's history.